episode 497. Welcome to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. Today's episode will be about the life cycle of a BAS project. All the information covered in this episode can be found on our website at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/497. That's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/497. Today, I'm here with Michael, a business professional in the BAS industry, and myself, and we're going to be going through the full life cycle of a building automation system project or a BAS project. And that'll be from the sales to the service agreements. So we're just going to go back and forth. I'll ask Michael some questions and then I'll just retort as we go through, and we'll just kind of go through the whole process of this. So let's get into it. You ready?
I'm ready. Ready when you are. I was born ready. I had to be.
Awesome. That's right. No choice. So
that's right. No choice.
So for part one, we've got our sales to spec review. So really understanding the scope of work is our first part of the BAS project. And so I'll ask you, from your side, what do you think the biggest or most important part of reviewing the scope of work is?
Yeah, I mean, from my years as an estimator, from experience in that, it's just reading the spec and making sure you pick up all the details of the spec. Also making sure if there's any addendums out there from the base spec, we make sure we pick those up. I've seen a lot of things get lost and missing from proposal scopes due to addendums not being identified. And usually it happens a lot, and it's not the fault of a salesperson because a lot of times these addendums come in at the very last minute. So we're scrambling and trying to get our price together to our contractor, and then an addendum comes in, we got to re-estimate it, and there's a whole process on estimating. You have to get a subcontractor price, you have to review it internally. It's a time factor. So things like that can affect the sales process and the scope. Another thing is making sure one of the biggest risk items, as a lot of us seen out there, is electrical subcontracts. And if you don't pick up all your points and you don't identify the points and tell them how you want it to wire, conduit versus open plenum, those are big risk factors that can cost a lot of money if it's not identified and picked up. So those are some pitfalls that I've seen that take place on the scope of work, on defining the scope of work, taking it to an estimate, and then seeing how it works in the real world.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I'll just add to that, sometimes we have building owners that don't really understand their own operational goals. So maybe they understand the high level, but there's a lot of items in the weeds that they don't necessarily understand or how that process goes. And so we might come up with a solution that just kind of misses the mark from a functionality standpoint. They might not be able to use it. It might be clunky. There could be things that don't really get to their goals. So we just have to be careful when we're designing, because we are still the expert in a lot of ways, and we see a lot more projects than the building owners do. So they might know their system. So having that balance or that synergy between the building owner and the designer is key.
Yep, I definitely agree. And that's another good point that you brought up. The existing buildings are a totally different type of project than a new construction, because you have guidelines like we talked about. You have mechanical plans. You have a control sequence maybe on the mechanical plans. And you have a specification that you know exactly what tolerances are supposed to be and all that, and where things are supposed to go. On an existing building retrofit, we are the people that make the scope. So we are responsible for that and making sure it's in the best interest of the customer too, not just the BAS company. So it's got to have a benefit, an ultimate benefit for the customer. And you really got to interview them and look through their building. You might have to do a site discovery of their building, maybe for a day or two. It takes time to do this, but that's part of customer relationships that you have to do in our industry to gain trust with our customers.
Yeah, no, totally agree. So going to the next step of this, we get into our submittals in the design phase. So my question to you would be, once we're in that design phase or in that engineering phase, as we call it, What's the process for building a good or quality submittal?
Yep. So really, I mean, submittals are supposed to be done on plan and spec projects according to the specification. So that's number one is we got to follow what the spec says, how we have to submit it and how we have to put together and what's supposed to be in the submittal. Usually it's always going to be like your cut sheets or your data sheets of all your sensors and devices. It's going to be your control drawings on the BAS system with the sequence of operation and maybe the points list and whatever else the specification requires. That's what we require to deliver to the mechanical contractor so he can deliver that to the GC. So basically just making sure you have all your points covered, making sure everything's good to go, ready for the engineer review, and hope it doesn't get rejected from the submittal.
Right. Yeah, we don't want that. That's a headache for sure. Yeah, and I think just kind of building off of that, when we go into the field, if there's a lot of disconnect that we might have or some unclear issues that we come across, like your naming conventions, making sure all your points are named to where everybody understands it, not just you, because that could cause a lot of chaos for programmers or people that are going to be working on this down the line. So having some clarity there would be important. And also making sure that the sequences make sense and you're not just coming up with something because you are a clever programmer, but you want to make sure that it's feasible and also something that is user friendly at the same time.
Yeah, very good point. So make sure the sequences match. Make sure they didn't accidentally put a sequence from another job and they didn't, proofread it. I've seen that happen before where it doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense and technicians or engineers are listening to this, please make sure we submit an RFI. Obviously, I'm sure you do. Don't be afraid to do that. You're not going to bother the engineer or the owner. You're just making sure everything is up to their expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so moving forward, we get into the install phase. So that's our field wiring, labeling, documentation. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty here. So if you're looking at it from an electrical standpoint, how would you manage the coordination with the electrical contractors?
From the electrical point of view, so we're in the installation phase now. So we're saying we got the PO, we're on the job site, and now we're managing the subcontractors. Well, that has to be done. Really, it starts with the estimate and the estimator. Hopefully, they had a good scope of work. They identified all the points they want to wire. They know how to install it with conduit or open plenum and etc. And then at that part, you are managing the electrical subcontractors. So they have a proposal, hopefully, that we have accepted for them to do our work. And then we need to make sure they do exactly the work that we expect them to do. If they have questions, you need to help them on that part as well.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of to that point, making sure that they don't take any shortcuts, right? Because sometimes those shortcuts end up snowballing into some pretty expensive problems.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to get it right the first time.
Yeah, the office I worked at for many years, we used to train our electricians how to do stuff. We'd spend a day with them on the job site, just showing them how to terminate our specific controllers. What we expect out of wire when we use wire nuts. What's our expectation for taping back the shield on a comm link? Everything. How to install rib relay. We had them installing our devices and actuators too at one point. So a lot of these electricians can be trainable to do that. And it works out great if you can have a good set of 3 electricians in the bullpen ready to go. Get 3 quotes, let the best one go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to add on to that as well, and that kind of makes sense where we want to make sure that we're prioritizing the documentation and labeling of everything.
Oh, yeah.
We just want to verify if everything's connected, kind of to your point with making sure the technicians or the electricians are all ready to go. We also want to make sure everything's verified. Every wire, device, panel, all of that should be labeled. The tug test, everything is in line as we're installing because, again, you don't want something to happen down the road.
Right. And also one thing, too, that I just thought of, we got to make sure we identify what's included by the BAS contractor or the mechanical since we work
Yeah.
under the mechanical, and what's the
Yep.
job site electrician. You don't want to double up on prices, or you might not win too many controls jobs because
Hmm.
you're paying for that twice basically. So make sure you read the spec and make sure we confirm that with your customer and exclude it if it's going to be excluded from the proposal, because there's some big ticket items that can add up, and it can
Yeah.
put you out of the budget to win the job.
Yeah, and that doesn't look good going down the road, right?
Yeah.
Some of those references as well. So no, that's a great point.
Mhm.
So moving down the line in our process, after we install, then we start programming and we come up with all our graphics as well, right? All our
Mhm.
standard sequences. So from this aspect, what's the biggest mistake in programming and graphics that you see?
The biggest mistake in programming. I come from a company that used a very nice user interface, and I think it should be very simple for customers to use and technicians.
Yeah,
I like the Windows based, the block programming is really good.
yeah,
I'm not sure if the customers should really be programming. Maybe they can if they go to some proper training with you. A lot of times, and I think this is really funny, but they think a lot of the mindset of a control salesperson, and I used to think this way too, the more you train your customer, the less they're going to buy from you. And that's actually the
mm,
opposite. The more you train them how to use your system, the more comfortable they're going to be with it, the happier they're
yeah,
going to be with it, and they're going to keep coming back to you.
yep,
So, I mean, if they're willing to do that, um, that might be something to look into. Very few customers are going to want to program. They're going to look to us to do that. And same thing with graphics. I've seen graphics look really cool. And
yeah,
sometimes that's the main selling point of a project. They just demo a 3D graphic plant and they're like, that's what we want. And then they get their system and they're not happy with it because
mm,
it wasn't quite what they expected. But the
yeah,
graphics look cool to begin with. But I
yeah,
do think graphics does have a good place, especially for
yeah,
beginners, to make it easy to override things. But
yep.
we got to be careful in how much they can override so they don't mess up the system downstream.
Yeah, yeah, and just to touch on that, I think the user experience is really important, right?
Oh
As
yeah.
you mentioned, I think the graphics might look cool, but really the most important thing is how intuitive they are. We see this all the time with our programs and how something feels clunky or you have to click this or click that and you can't find something and you're like, I just
Yeah.
spent 10 minutes trying to figure this out when it should just kind of work, right? So
Right.
I think having the clear animations, labels, alarm states, everything should be user friendly. And as you said, I mean, the more they know, the better off everybody is and the happier everybody
Right.
is, which is the customer first, right? We want to make
Yeah.
sure everybody's happy, the user's happy, the building owner is happy, the managers, everybody.
Right. It's a win-win deal for everybody, and that's really the mindset we need to have in building automation.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I mean, that's how a BAS shines, is
Yep.
just having that.
Absolutely.
So, so moving to our commissioning stage. So
Sure.
here we do our point-to-point checkout and we have our commissioning.
Hmm.
So from this aspect, do you use any tools or checklists when you go through your commissioning process?
Oh yeah. So when I used to do my point-to-point checkout, there would definitely be a points list. You got to have that and have that done before you go to the job site. Don't do it just in time, because when you do it just in time, I notice that people skip over a lot of stuff. Make
Hmm.
sure that it's some kind of process in your office to make sure it gets done. And I
Yep.
know that it's just another thing to do on the job site, but it's very important to do a proper startup and checkout. That way, we don't have any callbacks, obviously. So checking all your inputs, making sure you do a checkbox. You have to physically check it. You can't just like pencil whip it down there and just say we did it and you didn't do it. And make sure that it gets reported back to your management team to make sure you uh, did it and everything. So
Yeah.
checking the sequences, checking the alarms, overrides, the
Yeah.
common things on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a very exciting or glamorous process, right? But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is where you make sure everything works. I mean, it might be the most important because you're now handing it off, right? So you need to
Hmm.
make sure everything's in the right spot based on
Yeah.
the design aspects or if there was a revision to the design. All that needs to be done or checked or commissioned before handing it off.
Hmm.
So that's one of the key things for client trust is making sure that's in a good part or a good stage before handing it off.
Yeah. And another thing too that I just thought of is like we used to do for like test and balance. A lot of times if you have a
Hmm.
test and balance agent and you have to override a bunch of points on your air handler or your chill water system, you usually have to sit there with the test and balance agent all day and override things.
Yeah.
Some companies, and we used to do this a lot, is we would just loan them one of our laptops with our test and balance software on it. We would train them how to use it, and then they can go out and do all their testing on the system. And what I would do usually if I did that, I would usually find a reason to be on the job site so I can multitask in case they had
Yeah.
questions. If I
Yep.
had to do some kind of graphics or something, I would do it on the job site there with him there. That way, if he had questions, we can address that, and so
Yeah.
on. So just to be
No,
thinking
great
about
point.
that when you go do your project management on the job site, making sure you're getting the best use of your time.
Yeah, no, that's a
Yeah.
great point. So once we commission a job, we then move to the training of our customers and any closeout documentation that we might have with that closeout.
Hmm.
And so when we're training a customer for hands-on practice, what makes a good training session with the customer?
Well, what I used to do when I trained customers is I would get into their office where they had the building, user interface computer or something, and we'd usually start there. And this would be kind of a sit down theory lesson about not really theory, but just going over the control drawings, showing them what exactly all the pieces are of their system, what each
Yeah.
sequence was. Then you can go to the user interface and kind of show them what the graphics look like and how to navigate their tree. And then you want to do a walk, a site visit with them to go to every air handler, show them where every controller is right here. If you want to go the extra mile, show them if you want to give them privileges to hook up to it, show them where to hook up to it. You can demo that. It really depends on how much detail you want to do. You can make just a basic training, or you can make it more detailed. Now, a lot of times this is dependent on the spec. Okay, it requires maybe only 8 hours of training. Okay, there's only so much you can do in 8 hours. That doesn't mean you can't, like we talked about before, maybe provide a service agreement at this point or propose it to them with training in there, continuous training every year to help them keep up with their system because 8 hours usually is not enough time to do nothing more than just basic user functions on that.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Awesome. From a documentation standpoint, I'll just point out that we send everything digitally nowadays. I mean, this is 2025, so everything's digital. So all your as-built, your controller backups, the any O&M manuals, all of that will be sent digitally, and they'll have copies of that so that they can reference. We want to make sure all of that is organized and that they can search that easily. I mean,
Mhm.
Control F is your friend. We want to make sure we can find all of that. And that way that it's a clear process or a fast and easy process for troubleshooting. Once they're trained on it, they still might need to go back and reference something. So if we help them be able to do that, that would make their life a lot easier. So
Mhm.
I think just being clear with the documentation is really important.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that for sure on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of times they need to go back and reference something. And if you didn't send the copy digitally, or if again it's buried in the
Mhm.
weeds, it's
Yeah, I mean,
definitely
even
something
we
that you
live in the
run into.
digital world today. You'd be surprised. There's some specs that do require hard copies, at least two hard copies of all the O&M
Mm,
manuals and all that stuff. I
yep.
remember our engineer when I was working at Train when I first started. We were working on these government jobs, the Corps of Engineer jobs, and he would be up all
Yeah.
night, working on those
Mm,
things and printing them out just to get them ready for submittal. So,
wow.
yeah, digital's a way to do it, but also be
Yeah.
aware of some of this stuff. You have to do hard copies, and it is time consuming.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you have to go to a print shop and
Yeah.
pay some money to do it, and it
Oh
takes
yeah.
time. You're
That should
absolutely
be in the
right. I've
estimate
seen
too as
that.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so once we have all of that done, all our documentations updated, we've trained our operators on everything or our building owners, then we get into any of the service agreements and lifecycle maintenance that we see or we come across.
Hmm.
So, what should be included in that lifecycle plan?
Oh, life cycle plan. Oh, yes. Okay. So that's one thing that I used to notice a lot when I was doing control sales and estimating, especially with existing buildings. You go interview the building operator or building engineer, and they have no replacement plan for their building automation system. So these things, and then we're talking about systems that are like 10 or 15 years old already. They're becoming legacy systems. They don't even have the protocols, like a common protocol to follow. It's a proprietary system or something. So that system is at the end of its life cycle. And my thing is they don't plan for it. You need to get in there if you're listening to this and you're in sales or you're an estimator or even a technician. You need to put the bug in there that this isn't going to last forever, and we need to start replacing things in stages if we can't do it in your current budget. So you got to do pieces at a time. You might start with the chiller plant. You might have to live with two different systems if it's a competitor system, or you might have to live with a legacy system if it's your system and you have an older system. You got to find a way to talk to it during that transition. So it's very detailed. I might do a future podcast on replacement planning
That'd
for
be
BAS
great.
systems, because that's one thing I noticed that a lot of existing building operators and owners forget to do. And it's easy to forget because we got a lot of cost out there. We're trying just to make things work. And if the system works
Yeah.
fine, it's hard to say, okay, let's go ahead and buy a new one.
Mm.
So, but that's
Yeah.
very understandable, especially in today's economy. But in the long
Yeah.
run, you're going to save money
Yep.
because the system's going to crash all at one time, and
Yep.
you're going to have angry tenants. And then you're also going to
Yeah.
have to replace your system all at one time, potentially.
Yeah. Not a good situation at all.
Mhm.
And like you said, I mean, it's all about sustainability of the system and really bigger picture your entire building.
Mhm.
So, as time goes on, buildings evolve. A lot of times we'll see something like a sensor fail, or we have maybe one room gets changed from a gym to a office space, a big office space, and so our occupancy changes, or our load requirements for that area change. Without having a service agreement, we don't have those regular tune-ups, and we need to make sure that we have those in order to move along with how the building moves along, or evolve with the building. I guess my favorite saying is adapt or die. And so having service agreements that help help the system adapt or be worked on is so important.
Yep. And, I think we talked about this before, like recommissioning. Most
Hmm.
buildings, they only commission at one time, and it's during
Yep.
startup. A lot of people, they don't do a full commissioning later. Now, a service agreement actually does a lot of the recommissioning. It checks all the sensors. It does like a
Yep.
point-to-point checkout. Sometimes it'll check. We used to do it where we check the program to make sure the sequence was working. You check the
Yep.
alarm log, all this stuff here. So that's kind of like a service agreement. Where you do a quarterly check. You can do it two times a year. That's a biannual, I think is what they call it. Or maybe it's
Yeah.
just once a year. Even if it's just once a year visit from your BAS company to do a quick service, that would go a long ways, really, in energy efficiency and to reduce downtime as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Oh no, yeah,
Mm.
you don't want to be down for too long, right?
Yeah.
That's very important. Especially like if you look at like an elevator or something like that, and you have a apartment building that's 10 stories and that elevator's down, you're not going to have some happy tenants. So just
No.
knowing systems do fail and systems do go down, being able to prevent those from taking too long, having those
Hmm.
service agreements updating or keeping them in line is, yeah, something to really pay attention to.
Absolutely.
So did you want to share a document with us to go over,
Yeah,
and
we
we can,
can. Yeah, I was
yeah,
just gonna kind of show real quick a document on a scope of work here. So I'm
yeah,
gonna share my screen here. If you guys can see that,
yep, looks
I can
good.
kind of go through this. Now we talked about the scope of work and why it's important. This is
Yep.
like just a basic controls proposal. And this is really important for BAS techs and engineers and everybody really to understand, because this proposal is what we are responsible for financially and
Hmm.
physically to install. So it's really important to have a detailed scope of work. This one's a very basic one. When I was doing estimating, I would actually add more detail to these. Like I would add on the air handler exactly what sensors we're going to include, what kind of
Sure.
reheat it was. You might have seen
Yep.
those. I just made this short for this discussion only, but We have the equipment here that's described that we're going to control here. This building automation system is going to connect to this. Now, the thing that's risky about doing this, and you're not naming every single thing, is if you left anything out and the mechanical contractor, your customer didn't see that, you're going to be responsible for the whole thing here because you didn't exclude it and you didn't note it. So that's just basic things on reading scopes and to make sure everything is accurate. Okay.
Yeah.
So here we have equipment and building pressure relief, temperature monitoring, and all that stuff here. You might even want to put, if there's special programming, if there's like supplier reset, you might want to put that on here. Includes all other programming and stuff like that. If there's any integration, we'll name those here.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's graphics included, we'll do that. If it's 3D graphics, you'll have to describe that specifically. Sometimes it's either 2D basic graphics or 3D. 3D obviously costs more because you got to have graphic artists to do that, unless our technicians can do that, which we usually don't. But some of us can, maybe. Training, that's important to include the training. This also makes you find in the spec where it's training. Okay, so make sure you include that. And warranty, rule of thumb, we used to use maybe 3% of the total cost. And warranty just kind of just depends on how your office wants it. So that just depends. That's how we'd estimate it, but the type of warranty is in the spec. So as required by spec. Now, as we're putting together control scopes of work and we go to proposal, a lot of times we'll identify things that could be ads. We don't know if they have enough money in their budget to do this. They might, but we're going to throw this out here. And I used to do this because this is something that can provide them benefit. We saw a boiler that's not connected to their system. Hey, we're going to put this ad on here to show you if you want to add that, we could do that. If not, that's okay. You don't have to take the ad. If you want to do it in the future, here it is. They know where it's at. They can come call you when they get some money to do it. And then also deducts. Like if you can predict things like this integration might go out of budget, this is just something an experienced salesperson does, or an estimator. They can see things that might go out of budget. We provide a deduct already. That way on bid day, they can just take it out and go, and they'll go with your price, maybe.
Yeah.
But this is just convenient for your customer, like the mechanical contractor on bid day. And it's also important for the technician to understand if the deduct was taken or not during the turnover meeting. Okay.
Good point.
Very important, because you don't want to do work that was not bought.
Yeah.
So obviously.
Absolutely.
And then also we want to make sure we read the assumptions. We're assuming this from the spec. Some of this might have been gray. We didn't get an RFI. But this is typical for most building automation projects, like conduit stub ups. We're going to assume that's going to be provided by others. The job site electrician, control wires, open plenum, and concealed areas and conduit and exposed. That's very common. So things like that will keep you out of trouble there. And then exclusions. These are things we're not going to include at all. Okay. So we're not going to work overtime. Make sure they know that. And that's in the spec too. Sometimes they might want you and expect you to work overtime, and you might choose to do that, but at least you excluded it here if you have that option. Okay. And then providing the integration interfaces is by others. We don't want to provide those. And also just installation of mechanical devices. Obviously, we're going to work for the mechanical. They're going to install this for us, but we just want to make sure they understand that they're going to do it, not us. So communication is key.
Exactly.
In this part over here. And we need to know that too, not just during the sales process, but post sale. So we don't double up on things.
Yeah.
Okay. And usually they might have the prices laid out like this, nice and neat, where you have the base price, add or deduct. They'll just circle the ones usually that they want, or they'll verify in the signature base bid only, alternate add, or they're going to do the deduct. Okay. So that's kind of how that goes. That's all I have on that. That's a real short and sweet proposal.
Yeah. I think
if I was
really
doing this in the
to
real
see.
world, I'd do it like I used to and probably get more detail. Like this is going to be fan start stop relay, chill water valve, blah, 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 whatever the sequence is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, I think that's really helpful to see, at least get people's heads wrapped around what all you might come across for a controls proposal. So no, that's really helpful. Right. I think that concludes our episode. We covered a lot, and so I hope everybody enjoyed this. Thanks for listening to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. We hope you learned a lot from this episode. If you found this episode valuable, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, please share this with your network. As always, this episode will be available on our website at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/497. Thanks again to Michael, my guest, and I had a great conversation. And until next time, keep building smarter.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.